Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. Let's dive into it. Retaliation of an inner archetypal death. And so, in this episode, I would like to share, at least through my own eyes, some insight into what violence is and what is this urge in the human creature. What is its value? First off, I'm going to read for you the definition of it so we have a stable kind of point we can start off. Violence is defined as behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something, strength of emotion or an unpleasant or destructive natural force, or the unlawful exercise of physical force or intimidation by the exhibition of such force. What's interesting is based on the context you see to the concept at hand, you define an object's nature. That means, for example, a knife can be used to cut fruit, eat food, or it can be used to hurt people. You see, the knife is like the concept, and it's the context in which it's in, which suggests if it's righteous or unrighteous. Now I looked at, this is where I want to go with this. I looked at human psychology. I looked at animal psychology. And I noticed that what happens when a creature is cornered? There is the animal instincts, the wilderness. I don't know how many people have seen an animal be cornered and intimidated, but the animal gets wild and vicious. I saw this in my childhood, you know. Now I looked at human beings and I was like, what if we're all animals? There is that retaliation urge. There is that urge to continue existing, and when the chaotic intensity pushes you, you gotta put a mirror in front of the chaos and push it back. In my youth, I saw this, we went to this cottage, there was this dog, and it was pretty messed up. I was just casually walking around, a kid, and then I saw that they were cutting the ear of the dog to make the dog be more violent, And it was such a messed up tactic because it was like kind of by showing pain, you are disturbing the psychology of the creature, you know? Human beings are as wise as they don't disturb other species. Anyways, in animal psychology, the cornered animal has nowhere to go, and because it needs to be an expression of its own existence, there is a retaliation. And I thought about human beings and all the times in this world, stretching from movies, from news, from YouTube clips, from my own experience of being in fights and whatnot, like, what it is some inner image of the person is being changed to themselves. And it's as if we have an expectation from the world, how the world should be, but we have an expectation from our own self. And when we don't meet the expectation of our own self, You know, it's one thing to fail in the eyes of others. But what is more painful is to fail in your own eyes. And I feel violence is internal failure. When a human being is violent, that means something from the inner realms is not being sensitive to how the outer realms are. Because if the human being really studied the human being, if people were conscious of who they were, they would notice how fragile human life is. How fragile it is. Even though it's strong, even though it has endured somehow. You know? I'm not taking away from our strength, but I'm saying behind our shield there is a fragility to the human species. Now, I was kind of like, I mean, I didn't write it in the title, but the way I was thinking about the title was that retaliation of an inner, the outer retaliation of an inner archetypal death. Now, what are archetypes? That's worth explanation as well. So Carl Jung spoke about archetypes, and I feel how we're existing to ourselves behind our eyes is not per se as an image, it's as an event. And within that event, there are various roles which are the archetypes. Now, when you see an archetype, I mean, of course, Carl Jung spoke about it differently, but there's also this generalized view of the archetype that it's kind of like the role that your mind fathoms. The archetypes are kind of like, just like how the person learned an alphabet, it's like how they learned about the positions of individualism. It's like the alphabet of individuality. In accordance, for example, there's an archetype, the mother archetype, the father archetype. You know, it's all the various ways the mind has considered itself, regardless of the physical constitution, a relationship with reality. Now, when you look at violence on this planet, I mean, of course, on one level, we were animals. The ancient Greeks would say to tame the savageness of man and make gentler the life of this world. That's what the ancient Greeks were trying to do. They were like, okay, we're a bunch of wild beasts. Let's kind of, organize. Let's kind of leash ourselves with a civilization that is worth it. So there's something with the way the human being is identifying behind their eyes that when it reaches a point where they can't be a certain role to themselves, the person becomes violent. I'm telling you, because it's honor. We forget how much there is a sort of linguistic mode to our own existence, that if it goes beyond that level, we start feeling reduced in the environment. I remember when I was attending high school in Canada. I mean, my life's kind of been back and forth between two countries, but I remember that I was like in our high school, the one, I have a twin brother. Sometimes when I think about when you're a twin, you think usually as we. And so, anyways, in during my high school experience, I remember there was this kid was on some level you would be like, all right, in a street smart way it was okay, but on another level it was as if he had no honor for himself, as if the kid had abandoned a sort of selfhood he was raised in just so that he could fit into the puzzle, he could be a puzzle piece in the environment, and there was something smart about what that kid was doing, but at the same time his name was Ali, and this kid, it was smart what he was doing, but on the longer picture it was a pure dishonor to himself. Do you know? his art, I totally could, at the time I couldn't, I didn't even know the concept of archetypes at the time, but years later I suddenly saw it as a perfect example that human beings, when they look at an environment, if they're a living creature, you want to be alive in that environment. You know, and so to be alive in that environment is actually meaning that before that you're alive in a sort of inner way to yourself. Right now, if someone asks you, who are you? That answer you give them is not the physical you. The physical you they can see. They can, but what it's implying is how the movement is being inspired based on whatever, how complex the psychology is. The way modern science is looking at psychology is that it's seeing it in layers. I'm telling you, just the scientific attempt is fundamentally a division, you know? Because if everything is one thing, what do we need to check? What do we need to find out? What do we need to explore? You know, if we all accepted everything to be this oneness, oneness doesn't have anything to do. You know, I'm saying this to the New Age community. All those people trying to go towards oneness, thinking all of life is to just be this oneness. You know, it's not. This oneness is a counter ego. It is like it is an idea that is has that its body is your whole moment. That's what oneness is, I would say, where the whole experience is being identified as the being. Because right now, when I think about my body, I see my body is separate from the world. But when I think about my mind is simultaneously being the experience of self and world. So, what I'm trying to say is that human beings exist through an inner story. And that story, for some people, it's cinematic. For some people, it's cinematic only based on what they experienced. Because this is the interesting thing, that we see this as a pattern in history. The more the creature has known about itself, the less it has justified itself based on the environment. I mean, when you look at the human being, I want you to imagine all the animals on this planet, and now imagine one of them was like, all right, screw this, I'm going to stand up on my two legs and build skyscrapers. So what I feel is that people are living two lives, and when we're inconsiderate, we get to see them limited to our own inner realms. Do you know how many people in this life it's like, it's kind of life. It's like weather. You know, after a point, does it make you sad when it rains? Do you cry when it rains? Do you suddenly get super happy when it's sunny? No, you just acknowledge it as the weather. It's kind of like we were conditioned to think that we have to be single snapshot images of truth only to recognize that life is too dynamic than a sentence can capture. This is why language can't contain you. And if you identify with language, do you know how many ways you can tear yourself apart? Do you know in how many ways you can the fragmentation of the psyche can occur? One interesting thing is that it's like without the fragmentation of the psyche, people feel even there would be no individuality. What does that mean? That means when you look into the work of Jacques Lacan, this philosopher, you see that he was speaking about the most important event in a child's life being that moment where it notices itself in the mirror. That instant where the child notices itself in the mirror and people are calling it by its name, it is initiated into individual consciousness. That means parents, or the environment of the child, is constantly initiating the child into its selfhood. Now the child trusts the environment at first. What can a newborn infant do? It has to just hug the mother. The mother has to hug the child. This is why like hugging young children is very important. Because years later they might be in a savage moment and then they remember that emotion may come to them. Do you know? If you want to have a relationship with a thought, with and as Hegel would say, an internal object, then you don't really need to do anything physical. That means it doesn't. I don't need to physically move my body to remember something. I could be wherever I am, and I can locate in my inner realms that image, you know, of my memory or whatever I choose to see. There was a time where I would force my inner realms. You know what that means? That means it's like it kind of felt like I was this novice painter beside this master painter, and I had seen the master painter, and I wanted to suddenly paint a master painting, but I didn't have the skill. You know, sometimes when you attempt something bigger than you can hold, you know, it's as if it's a learning experience, but the success is in that moment. People feel success comes at the beginning. No, success is a long-term analysis. It's literally you just look back and you're like, okay, I did okay. But really, when you look in the future, there's no success. It's all unknown variables ad infinitum. That's the beautiful thing about life. That we are realizing we're not limited to a location based on a story we're telling ourselves, you know? It's like there was a time in my life, it was hilarious, you know? I don't know how to say it. I was just looking, like I was just in a moment of sight, and I'm like, why am I telling this story to myself? It's kind of like, I'll give you an example in my own life. Um, there was something in my youth. This is in my youth. This is years ago. But there was something I was doing that I shouldn't have been doing. And long story short, I was caught in the intoxication, and suddenly I confronted my father. My father kind of saw me when I was in a different state. And my father just stared at me, and I stared at him, and it was like, you know how from the eyes of someone, you could totally know how they feel, you know, or what the situation is, just from how the eyes of someone looks at you. You know, the eyes are very powerful. A lot of communication is just where the eyes of the creature is looking at before they speak. And I remember, of course, this is years ago, and I mean, my background's Persian. So what happened is that situation passed, and then I had a moment where my father came up to me and he told me, I didn't say anything to you because I didn't want to embarrass you in front of yourself. But you deserve better. You know, that means you deserve a better kind of vision. You know, something of the sort. And it was such a mind-boggling moment at that time, you know? Because I'm telling you, Persian culture has its advantages and disadvantages, you know? Especially being raped. And it was very phenomenal because it was as if I kind of saw that we kind of forget, you know, sometimes in how we communicate with other people, that they are being something to themselves. And what a person says can change that to themselves, you know? And I feel that retaliation, which is an inner archetypal death, literally a version of you in an ideal format, is dying when it feels it can't handle the moment. The archetype feels low. What does that mean? That means, imagine right now you think you're a good father, or you think you're let's say you think you're a good employer, And then all your employees come to you and suddenly say you're not a good employer. And then in that moment you'd be like, oh my God, it's as if the archetype is beginning to break in your own inner realms to you. And this is why in all the motivational videos you see ever, the people are just like, keep going through, just endure, just get through this life, you know? Just see how far you can go. Because there's a strange honor that finds any member of a species when they see something that their species doesn't know. When they see, it's like, let me tell you, imagine like you're going to go meet your cousin and you suddenly see your cousin's in a fight. Imagine, you see your cousin is in a fight. In that instant, you kind of just join the fight. Do you know? It's like the other is important for you, for example. Whether it's sibling, friends, whatever. When something is happening to something you care about, there is some response. We're not just like trees, you know, that we do nothing. The person has a response. It's like if someone comes and pushes you right now, regardless of how much you say, I am oneness. Oneness can't be pushed. But I'm telling you, that moment when someone pushes you, there is a force entering your reality, and you have to be mindful to handle that force. There has been times where I've been in situations where the person has said something and I know the person's just trying to express themselves in the moment. They're just trying to be a part of some moment in their mind, you know? So I've let it go. But there's been times where I remember, and this is when I was in Iran, there was pretty much it was like the schoolyard was a battlefield. You acknowledged it to some degree, you know. You know, in Western countries, it's like they see it as bullying. In Eastern countries, it is street fights everywhere, you know. Not that street fights everywhere, but it's open to that. It's like literally the civility of the environment is not that high, so it suddenly reduces into violence. When you see violence, just know that that's a situation where the person is not observing the long term. Violent people don't think for the long term. Therefore, anyone who follows a violent person in the short term, they get destroyed. Because in order to think of the long term, you got to care about the space. In order to care about the space, you want to care about it in the most balanced way. Human beings are not either like good-natured or bad. This thing about someone being evil and someone being good, on some level, we are putting the landscape. That means if there was no world, if there was just a man hovering in the middle of space, no planet, nothing, how could that person be good or bad? You see what I mean? It's the landscape that creates the possibilities for those actions to come into conscious manifestation to everybody. So I feel that the thing is, I wondered, where is this war happening? We're on a planet that, even though right now it's pretty civilized, as things are getting better on this planet, but we have had a long lineage of war, and even to this day, even right now as I'm speaking, probably there's some country getting bombed. Like there's some messed up event is happening. And what are these events? On some level, they're oriented to resource-based. Okay, it's management. It's a management issue. It's a war over management of phenomena. The other is internal conflict of identity. That means, don't you see how messed up it was that, for example, Hitler in his propaganda came and made a people's into, Hitler saw human beings as bacteria. How messed up is that? As something that should be gotten rid of. And that idea is like, I can't tell you that war has been blind, the blind fighting the blind. That's all that it has been. And I'm not the one even saying this. If anybody has ever heard of the name Leo Tolstoy, this Russian philosopher, go read his work. He's the one who said it way better than me, you know, of how much that it was as if like during the Russo-Japanese War, the Russian Tsar was telling the Russian soldiers, God is with us, and in Japan, the person was saying the forces of nature are with us or whatever, you know. So it was a situation where two kingdoms are fighting each other. You know, they both think God is on their side, and they're meant to be the winner. And in the middle, guess what? The gods stand there watching in their minds, and the people destroy themselves. You see, one thing we know is that even though our species has been foolish, we are not fools because we've updated. Anytime, even a micro thing you update in your life, that's evidence that the whole thing can update. Right now, there were so many things. There was a moment in my life where I'm like, yo, I'm going to go get a glass of water, a cup from the cupboard. My hand doesn't doubt. I don't sit down planning for years, trying to make some sort of strategy, towards like how to get a cup from a cupboard. It's instantaneous. The knowing of the ability that I can pick up that cup and fill it up with water is instantaneous. Then I thought about it. How is it that when it comes to my own, the mysteries of I don't know. There was this article that was saying like we use like, what is it, like 12% of our brain. Dolphins use 20. It's like how do we use the rest of it? Da 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 da. The fact that we are using a little percentage of our brain to build this kind of civilization. Imagine if the full brain was accessed. Do you know? Because humanity's ultimate issue is the void. Let me tell you, their reasoning for violence is the cornered animal psychology. And I would say it's like a cornered archetype. Is when the person feels their world story, if they just change their attention, nothing can happen, so they have to be violent. But there's a karma. There's a huge karma to violence. It's like the person who poetically pushed someone down. Do you know? The wind blew him down first. So this retaliation of this idea that we are to the circumstance in the moment, and the fascination that tomorrow we wake up and the archetype animates differently, is evoked differently. War begins in the minds of man, but also peace begins in the minds of man. That's the greatest clue. Find where war happens, and you also find the location where you need to build your peace. The first place where the war took place. And usually, what is war? It is in some sense disagreements with extreme consequences. And that's messed up. That a lot of physical human violence is due to conceptual management of both individuals of their inner realms. You see, we can't ignore the competitive angle, right? Right now, we're living in a point of history that we can't act like it's a utopia. That's foolish. If you act like this world is a utopia, you don't even see the world. You're probably locked in your inner realm still. Not locked, but I mean like your attention is on how, let me tell you, like what I realized is that sight, everybody, like your eyes, your biological eyes, sure, we can say those are your eyes, but sight doesn't belong to the eyes. Just because light enters our eyes doesn't mean that our sight is us. So when you become an observer of a sight, at that point, if you've naturally, as a human being on this earth, you've observed your sight, you've wondered about your mind, the nature, the origin of it, that question, who am I, at a deep level has come to you. I'm not joking. You are alert. You hear your intuitive alerts. So that's the idea I wanted to say. Because I see it. I see it in human communication, and the concrete jungle is weird because the mind is living savage, but the body is no longer. That means we were physically violent back in the day when we were in, we were kingdoms were at siege, or even more primitive times than that. We were throwing spears at each other, and then we've come to a point where we don't throw spears at each other, even though there's violence. But we don't throw spears at each other. We now have a savage. We're like wild, subjective animals now in society. Now, this idea of it means that the subject is the responsibility of the attention that has kept it in. What does that mean? That means more important than the actor on stage in a theatrical performance is the guy holding the spotlight. If the spotlight is not on the actor, nobody sees the actor in that darkness of that Shakespearean play or whatever. Do you see? So the spotlight is our true nature, but the actor is the biological program at work. Because when can we wonder about the mind? What, after we die, we wonder about who we are? Before we were born, we wonder about who we are? Only now is where the greatest experiment can happen. And the greatest experiment is to look in a mirror and shout at the sky, wondering what the ultimate question is. Because it's not about answers. I was like, what is this obsession with people needing answers all the time? It's like, an answer is like somebody getting a cup and putting it underneath a waterfall and being like, hey everybody, here's the whole meaning of the waterfall. Every one of us is a different way that information and phenomenology is being contained. The processing is natural. That means the human intelligence is so badass that just like how you don't think about your lungs, you don't think about your heart, your body's organs, they're doing their work. The background awareness of your mind is also in nature's, to some degree in nature's, is being nature's eyes. That means it's like I wondered, how could there be death if there was no birth? What would the concept mean then? So you see, it's like we're creatures, we're just like our ancestors kind of, I don't know, they made fire somehow. Probably like lightning hit a tree, but let's say they used sticks and stones or whatever. Just like our ancestors looked around in their environment, found what was at their disposal, engaged, acted, did something, and then experienced advance. We sparked fire, and just like fire, we sparked language on this planet. And every person born gets a different, it's like you're like Oliver Twist style going with your plate, and civilization is throwing a bunch of information like grub on your plate, and you're like, thank you, sir, can I have please some more? And society's like, no, you're limited to your ethnocentrism, to where you're born, your class, da-da-da, 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 There's something that many philosophers, just for the sake of the honor of keeping the show of philosophy going, couldn't say, but Mr. Within's going to say it. It's that nothing is that before the concept of meaning, there was no subjective proof of reality. Right now, there is a subjective proof because you see you are here as a thought. Most people think they're a thought, which I think is ridiculous. How can a thought think? Anyways, guys, I just wanted to point that out. Now, my attention has come to the chat section. Oh my god. Jesus Christ. Sorry guys, I need to write an essay in the chat section. I'll be back soon. go. Let's see if we can bring calm to the storm. Human beings have an inner life. That's what I'm saying. That's what Mr. Within is saying. That's what people should take away from this. That there is phenomena occurring behind your eyes. And we can't be ignorant of it, and we can't just give it a zero value and say it's nothing. Do you know? That means, why is the design there? We are creatures that pay attention to our environment. We want to build a civilization filled with advanced communicators. Human beings that are aware of phenomenology in advanced levels. That means before they make a decision, they're seeing probabilities, you know? And based on the amount of probabilities you see, that fits into Darwinian evolution. Why? Because you want to survive. The more you see, the better you can survive. You know, this was, for example, the origin towards Terence McKenna's what is it called? Stone ape theory. That means it was a sort of chemical alteration. That means some people feel it was like, you know, consciousness was ignited by the hand of the creator 6,000 years ago. Certain fundamentalists, creationists perceive it that way. Some people feel it was an evolution, and in a sort of, after the Big Bang, what do they call it? Cosmic inflation. It's like through a millisecond, less than a second, phenomenology just poured out. Just like it was a jack in the box, the Big Bang. Galaxies were already, the program for them was set in, you know. So there's various ways human beings have interpreted reality. Me personally, I just noticed whatever I say, I would have to be categorized through a philosophical angle, because what I'm saying is, I'm a continental philosopher. For me, language's role in human consciousness is so still yet unknown, and how it is being conducted. The greatest clue, at least I've personally in my findings kind of found, is that its attention and presence is being in instantaneously, and because it's an instantaneous moment of being, you can't relate it to anything else. So it can't be defined in time. So our true being is not a concept. And I'm that guy saying this. Dr. Mordecai, I hope you're listening. But anyways, we have to observe. It's important. I mean, if you imagine you're a parent right now listening to my talk, don't you care about the inner life of your child? Don't you care about the inner life of your species? Don't you care about the how far your grandkids go? You know, so many people, I find it ridiculous. The responsibility of the average family man, let's say, is that he's like, all right, take care of my family. Little does that family man realize that it's like the future branches out and integrates. That means our cruelty is the denial of an efficient future. It's just like we didn't give ourselves as a species permission enough to see how far we could go if violence reaches towards an extinction event. And you know, right now, I think everybody's just crossing their fingers. Let's hope we don't destroy ourselves on this planet, you know. But let me tell you, sure, you can have hope, but you can also study the nature of the mind, because what has in this life given you an impression that you can't update? That the new can't realign how you perceive the past. The new experience can totally do that. I'll give you an example. Like, I did give you an example. Let me see if I can give a really nice example of the title. I remember a perfect, hilarious memory. Uh, I remember it was grade six, I think. My family had moved back to Iran for a few years to do my father's business and whatnot. This is when I was young, middle school or whatever. And I remember there was this school in Iran. It was called Tehran International School, and it was this it was Swiss based English, kind of the only English school, you know. And so it was me, a bunch of people, like from my classmates, just waiting outside of the gate of this school. And at the end of the school, all the kids from all the different grades from 1 to 12 would all come, what do you call it? They will all, they would all, what do you call it? They would all come and wait outside the gate for these taxis in Iran that kind of take you, and also buses and whatnot, right? There was this little kid, I forget the guy's name. I remember the face of this classmate, I don't remember his name. But he goes to tease this little kid waiting for a taxi. And the little kid has this warrior spirit, and the little kid comes and says, "Stop it, you silly." And we all start laughing. It was like, we saw, it was like, you know, when you push someone, you get a sense of who they are, you know? That's kind of insane how that occur. That's something in psychology, that when pressure comes into your moment, you're tested. Your character, your inner life is tested. So think about, in this life, you being a human being and you walking and nothing ever happening to you. Let's say pure karma. You have a pure karma. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, nothing happens. Okay. Now the thing is, though, if nothing happens, you are limited to your inner realms. So it's thanks to outer events. It's like the outer life updates the inner life. And when you observe and have, like, you know, as the intention of meditation was mindfulness and self-inquiry, you update the outer life. So believe it or not, if you want to increase the quality of your life, it has to do with the story you're telling yourself behind your eyes. If you want to experience, like, um, let's say you want more stuff in your moment, then the attention is, it's an outer solution, you know. Or let me say it like this. Let me abide with the symmetry of the idea. When I want to move an object in front of my eyes, that's called you have an intent. Okay, you have an intention in this world, an ambition or something. All right. So I see an object in front of me right now, and I want to move it. Now that impulse, it's as if the signal for my hand to move this object from the table to another part of the table came from within. It was like it came from me, that signal. So it's like an inner signal to change an outer thing, an outer signal to change an inner thing. So my words are coming across as an outer signal, and then your inner realm, because the in speech is subjective. And guys, of course, be mindful. We're 8 billion human beings on this earth, and if it was me, I would, like, from my angle, I think 8 billion human beings, everybody should start speaking about how life is being perceived, because it's like 8 billion versions of the world. Let's get these out and see what the global community would do with it. You know. So when I look at the concept of violence, Even that concept of, I was telling you, like, even if you have a pure karma, you need incidents, outer events to happen so you feel your inner life is healthy. This is why human like, I'm going to show something to people. This is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think most people are acquainted with it, but let's say you're a new human being to this earth, and I'll share it with you again. Somebody should make a song about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know? Can you imagine rappers rapping history? Like, I don't understand why rappers in this world aren't doing this. You know? They should just be rapping history books. You know how much more epic battles than street gunfights happened in history? You know? It's like, Maslow, where are you? Sorry guys, I'm just looking for the image. There we go, there we go. This is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, folks. Alright, this is important to acknowledge as a human being and as a social creature especially. Okay? Maslow was, to me, this system that he's designed is such a pioneering move that it's like, I don't know, like Maslow might, you know, if Maslow was alive and I had a time machine and I went back there, I would clap for him. I would just get a time machine and go back and just find Maslow and be like, yo, good job, man. You don't know how important what you're doing is, you know? Let me tell you why. Because here you see the different levels. And I want you to consider, usually if you're a young person listening to me, the idea of you is more real to you than the idea of the world. But as you live in this life and the more laps you run around the sun, the world begins to settle in and the way it's real becomes apparent to you. You know, then at that point, everybody has a sort of experiential knowing underneath any idea that they have. And once you become conscious of that experiential knowing, that's pretty much the whole intuition thing that's going on with Jungian synchronicity and whatnot. Okay, it's kind of like you're realizing you're it's as if the mind thinks the hand is tied, the soul knows the hands are free. You know, poetically speaking. So look at this. I'm gonna just explain this really quick in my own way, just to save time, because this is like I could dedicate a whole episode to this. And you don't know, I've talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in different ways. But anyways, here. You start on a physiological level. You as a human being, whoever you are, let's say even if you, I don't know, let's say you're a time traveler and you have no idea what's going on and you just found this podcast. Or I don't know, let's say in the future you're an AI listening to this, whatever. Physiological. What does that mean? That means the human being, you have to maintain your physical objective life. And so these are the basics: breathing, everybody has to breathe, food, water, sex, sleep, homeostasis, and excretion. Various things that these are kind of like in the background. These are like basics. Okay? Incredibly, like every human being needs this. Like if you're listening to me, you already know this. That's how you're alive. To you. So after imagine like you being this like kind of this person in the forest, and after you've kind of made your own headquarters, you know, or sorry, after you are physically like you've ate and your individual biological body is okay, then you go in maintaining an environment in your free will, you know, just like how, I don't know, what is it, like wolves piss on their territory. When a wolf wants to put a wall, it just, you know, pisses, you know. You know? Sorry guys, I'm just being playful. Guys, I just got this idea that in the future there's going to be a spray that human beings are going to spray themselves with this spray, and this spray is going to give off a scent that is going to scare animals, I think. So then people would be able to go camp safely through a sort of, I don't know, gas protection. Anyways, you're physiologically able. Then you go towards safety. Here it says security of body, employment, resources, morality, the family, health, and property. You set up shop. You start your headquarters, you know. Financially, this is like your bank account, you know. Because nowadays, it's like, especially ever since currency, there's also financial safety, you know. And that system needs work. After that, so imagine there is a... Okay, we're just going up the levels, guys. You know, you're physically at ease, then you're psychologically at ease, then there is the deeper dimensions of your human nature and having an unknown loved one where your mind updates endlessly with a relationship, you know. And then you go towards higher. It's like after you've constantly had these smaller battles and you've won these battles, you go up to self-esteem, confidence, achievement, respect of others. Let me tell you, all of this stuff only comes through endurance and experience, I feel. There's no such thing as confidence. There's just alertness and action. That's it. You know? You're just aware of phenomena. If you process it in a certain way, you engage. There is no such thing as confidence. I don't understand the word. The word is poetic. Poetically sure. You're like, be confident, you know? But in reality, it's when you really zoom into it, it's information processing. So on some level, reality is information. You are in a form. Right now, you listening to me, if you're drawn to my talks, it might be because of the content. You see, because of the information. So when you're going up, eventually you go towards self-actualization. That means the whole point of being a human being is that you are a unique self and you deserve to be actualized in the one lifetime you're here. Now the issue is, it's not just one person, you know, it's not just one person going up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. 8 billion people are going up. For example, you might be right now in a place where you have safety, but some child in Africa might not have safety, you know? And now imagine that self-actualization being an ultimate responsibility for what the self means. And if someone asks you, dear listener, this self that you think you are, what does it mean? You would see its meaning is codependent with everything else it's separating from to be itself. By the way, guys, out of curiosity, I've never asked this mid-talk, but how's the talk coming across so far? I thought maybe that's a good question to ask, to kind of see how the audience is perceiving it, yeah. Back in the day, they would say, The mind is a lousy master, but a good servant. Your inner realms are here not to direct you. They are here to serve you. The real you is not a concept. And Mr. Within is even saying it's neither an object or a subject, it's an awareness to them, simultaneous awareness to the phenomenology of both. And for the first time, the species is wondering, is a non-phenomena observing a phenomena? And what happens when 8 billion human beings trying to pull the curtain at the same time? Let me tell you, if that victory happens, eons will celebrate. We will celebrate for eons. An animal's destiny is not in the animal's control. The human being's destiny can be in the human being's control. It's very strange that if you were to think about world peace, if you were to think about a solution to human beings, if you were like that girl who was shouting in the UN, that young girl, Greta, I forget her last name. You see, it was as if that girl was crying because she was like, why can't people see this obvious issue? She was crying because she could see a fire that she felt others were not seeing. But the situation is that if, let's say in the future, let's say like, I don't know, in 120 years from now, they're human beings, their heads are connected all like group, like let's say, like technically, like ideology is like a prototype for a collective mind if we were to connect human. Like you see a bunch of people with the same exact belief is kind of like a collective being. No, sometimes I feel like the belief system is living through all the people. You know, it's like the belief, the language, the idea is like, imagine an alien, and an alien tries to invade. And if this alien is successful in its invasion, it would control the minds of the community, correct? So it's like this idea that when a bunch of people feel the world is just one sculpture of language, they are language, they worship language, then you stop experiencing reality naturally. When you stop experiencing reality naturally over a long period of time, there is sudden built up. It's like when you become aware of your inner life, what does that mean? That means, like for example, I could be like someone in the chat section could say something negative, and then I could like in the moment not be upset. But then maybe like a week later, suddenly I feel upset. You know, for no reason. As you go up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as you satisfy the objective realm, you go into automatically the wonder about the subjective realm. And the subjective realm is being influenced based on, I mean, on some level it's nature doing everything. But human beings have consciousness in the waking state. Some people even have consciousness in the dream state, and even yogis would be, certain yogis would be awake in their sleep. In deep sleep, they would still exist experientially to themselves, but not as existence dependent though. I feel that on some level we physically exist uh, for, let's say, a lifespan of 100 years. But every day, in regards to the experiential component to life, many senses of self. It's as if every moment is its own moment. You know what I mean? And it's kind of weird because if you think about it, from the first moment of your life, you awoke into the world. Being born is literally like your body's awakening, and then the psychology of the child coming into place. The child looking at itself in the mirror, it's like the mind being born. Right now, I am experiencing the topic, the title of the talk. Let me tell you how. The whole effort of my talk is that there is something observable in my inner realms. That's where the content comes from. And then I engage it on a more visual, manifest level. You know what it is? It's honestly, the mind is a surfboard, but it's a multidimensional surfboard. Probably all surfers around the world at the same time are going like, whoa. Guys, let me explain what I mean by how I feel I'm experiencing the title. You see, there is an inner life, let's say, an outer life. the outer life, and let's say they're simultaneous, two eyes that see the same, a subjective component to the moment and an objective component to the moment. I'm saying that subjective component, in order to be able to speak, in order to be able to communicate, you require individualism. In order to be an individual, the individual doesn't exist alone, there's a self and a world. So what does that mean? That means before you speak, there is an inner realm. When someone asks you like, hey man, what did you do like 10 years ago? Do you know? It's like you pause, and when you remember, you speak. What is that? That's the inner realm. Okay? So I'm saying that this retaliation of an inner archetype, it's like the nature of its intention, objective or subjective. That means it's like it's like when I think about, for example, extinction, I don't have in my mind, there's a sort of intensity I feel. Do you know? There's a sort of retaliation, there's a sort of offense I feel. Do you know? As a being. But what I'm trying to say is like the inner life. Which is what you want to be in the future, or how can I tell you, like, think of it this way. Think of that the word retaliation as energy being used up, and whatever you do, energy is being used up. That's the way I saw it through my own eyes. How I'm seeing, I saw that there's an effort. There's some effort. There's like some unknown landscape, and there's a known mover with an ability with effort. And as long as this effort is, that means it's as if the whole reality appears as a battlefield, for example. You know? Where there's this constant retaliation, not just for us to exist physically, but for the experiencer to remain and to comprehend itself. That means there were like two issues when we became conscious. We're like, oh no, we die. At some point it ends. At some point it's back into the void. And the other issue is that even though we are temporary and alive, we still don't know the depths of how we are alive. Because I'm telling you guys, this whole thing about violence is an approach. It's something the person is choosing to feel like a cornered animal. The person is choosing to be offended. It's literally like someone poking you endlessly, and you're like, how long are you going to let that poke go on? Now imagine this whole suffering that Buddha spoke about is like the whole natural world poking your shoulder. So after some point, you just stand your ground and you just go forth. For how long can you be pushed? Anyways, guys, I don't know. I hope that was clear to some people. I'm just saying it's more complex. Violence is more complex than just having physical reasoning. It's how the person is perceiving the world behind their eyes, as if it's okay for that activity to happen. It's like, why don't pet owners kick their pets, for example? Why? Because it's like it how can I don't know how to tell you, like it's awareness to the nature. You don't disturb nature. That's the one thing that I think has the most quickest karmic resolve, you know? The most instant karmic consequence when you don't abide by the nature of the moment. It's more important than even the ideas in the moment. So Honk in the chat section says some say the memories are stored in quotations outside of the head. Where are the memories of a hologram? So interesting comment. Let me tell you, there's been times where when I've come to throughout the years I've been speaking, like I've had an idea, and I'm not joking. Like midway of speaking about that idea, it's like imagine ideas like how the sun, the planets are orbiting around it. Imagine ideology is orbiting around you. Okay? And it's as if for a second your attention is on one and suddenly you notice another planet behind the planet you're seeing. And so that planet goes out of sight, do you know? And then you're looking at this planet and suddenly it comes back. I totally feel that there is a huge chance that there is what we feel is thought is a relationship of a subtler body with a subtler influence upon that body, you know? Because, guys, so many people don't realize that there is no one answer because there isn't one phenomena going on. So it is true that the more you become a social creature, the less you can think in absolutes. So you have to feel like you're on a roller coaster ride, or it would be too much existential responsibility for the experiencer. Do you know what that means? That means right now you are able to a point where you're responsible maybe for your biological body and you're responsible for your inner realms, your attention, right? Most people are at that point, but some people, their attention becomes non-local to them. When their attention becomes non-local to them for the first time, it's as if their past doesn't justify their behavior. It's what the antenna is receiving in the moment that justifies the behavior, you know? So it's kind of like wondering who you would be if your past had passed you by. Your past is gone. The past is past. Literally, the only thing that remains of my yesterday is my talk. I mean, not just that. You know, I'm still here. So, Honk, I will ask you a question because in the chat section you say all actions will yield the fruit of intentions behind it. Let me tell you, what would the intention of a non-conceptual creature be? That's a great question. So, guys, this is an interesting thing. I mean, I'll let the people read the chat section, but there's a lot of unknown in this world. When people fear the unknown, they either use knowledge as a hammer. When they feel the unknown is they fear the unknown, they have to hammer their knowing onto others. And what I mean by that is, I don't know, my relationship with how I have perceived myself as a concept and its realism. I totally accept the physical. I am no way in these talks have I ever said that you shouldn't be aware of the objective realm. I'm saying you start from the objective realm, but I'm saying when it comes to the hard problems of consciousness, it's an unknown where there's a simultaneity of you feeling you are this material object projecting your personality, but at the same time, that personality has free will and you have intentions arriving out of nowhere, right? So that's the situation. You see? Wow. Guys, Honk in the chat section has said one of the most epic quotes I've heard. He says, when all I have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Yeah, if the inner realm is in a certain lens, of course, you can't see anything outside of that lens. You know? Because the issue is man could not let the unknown be the unknown. So wars of knowledge endlessly pursue, but the best advantage, strategic advantage is to use the information. That means it's like the history we learn from history, really. Okay, alright. Alright, let's get back to the talk, guys. What can be said? I think that the best retaliation through violence is, before it happens, creating an option, a better option, because the human being into the inner realms appear as probabilities. I'm looking at this wallpaper, this picture, and it's incredible. I've personally never seen something in nature, a sky like this. And of course, this could be a coloring effect, but like a color grading effect. But it seems like it was a picture from the Grand Canyon. This is the Grand Canyon, like a forest nearby there. And when you look at all those stars, I mean, really, Socrates was right. The only true wisdom is to know that you know nothing. And really, the effort of our knowledge is an exploration. The fact that there's novelty to every moment is an exploration. The fact that people feel there's a truth and an illusion, the future is always like a dream, you know? And the past is something the person feels they've awakened from. So I'm telling you, the way we live as human beings is that we don't go 24/7 thinking we know everything, we can discriminate everything exactly. We're just, in the inner realms, there's probabilities, and these probabilities implement. That means when you look at an object, you see all the different ways you can hold it. When your mind enters a room, it's looking at all the different ways it can be. And I feel that when we truly become conscious of our inner realms, we will be mind boggled of how much complex geometry is really at work in regards to what we think just remembering is or visualization is. There's an inner geometrical relationship. It's as if like we don't have or it's like we don't have technology that could see it, but if we had an advanced technology, I'm pretty sure that there is way more around the person in the space. You know what? I remember giving this talk, and in it I was wondering, is space really empty? Really, is space empty, or is it just one side of the coin? Or could space, for example, there's this story, or there's this story where there's these bunch of fish, this younger fish, and they go to this older fish. They go to this older fish, this sage of a fish, let's say sage fish. Probably there is a fish like that. They go to this fish and they're like, yo, fish, tell us, what is this God? And little do they know what the God is to them is the ocean. And the wise old fish tells them, guys, it's not a bigger fish. You know, it's not, it's everywhere. Its currents are moving you. Me and you are simultaneously being it. If you were a polytheist, you would say everything is God. If you were monotheistic, you would think everything belongs to God. You know, if you didn't believe, if you were atheist, you wouldn't see it as God. You would see it as just a movement of an incomprehensible nature. You know. So the thing is, it's very hard to see something you're being because you're simultaneously, it's like the sight is being it. It's like there's a point where existence and experience meet, and that's attention, raw attention. I feel any human being who comes to that point, you open up. You become an advanced communicator automatically, based on how your inner realms, how you've observed your inner realms. Because when you see, for example, what was his name, Arthur Conan Doyle, the person who wrote the Sherlock Holmes novels, you know, you see that it's like Sherlock Holmes had this constant lens of like deduction and induction going on. He wanted to suddenly see what the small things implied and how the big things changed the small things, changed the implication of the small things, you know? And so the phenomenon, the processing of induction and deduction is not a physical thing. You can think of an apple visualize an apple hovering in your room, in front of you, but you can't pick up that apple and bite it. Do you see? So it's like the mind is projective. There is something there, but it is subtle. And it is subtler than the laws of physicality, because I can visualize an apple kind of hovering in the air, but the apple doesn't fall onto the ground. Why is it that when I visualize an apple in the room, gravity didn't act on that idea I had? Why was it that in some sense it was like, I'm just saying that every concept or this notion of a thought is chaotic. It's like an empty container. It's like a glass container, the idea of a thought. That means everything is reduced to how it is contained, how it is kept, how the moment is there. Even when you look at yourself, you want to climb the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you gotta also be attentive in that way. What that means is we have to create an advanced civilization with the members of that civilization being so advanced that whether they speak or not, they are I don't know how to finish that thought. People are hilarious. Sorry guys, I'm just having fun with the chat section. I would recommend the audience to focus on the content, and if you want to comment on what I'm saying, is way more interesting than commenting on me, you know. I want to go into a quote tunnel of Carl Jung about the unconscious, which I feel is the most noble. Sorry guys, got disconnected for a second. Anyways, Carl Jung quotes about the unconscious. And it's very important, you know. It's kind of weird. When you look at Eastern cultures, they have a kind of sophisticated metaphysics, you know. And when you look at Western culture, there is metaphysics at work. Do you know there's metaphysics to anything because we observe beyond the physics. We're the one observing to conducting the physical experiment. Do you know? We're the one to see the result. So anyways, this idea of the unconscious is not something to fear. Study it, you know, learn from it. What else can we do in this void? We gotta do something, yeah. Here we go, guys. A quote tunnel is a segment of this show where I read a bunch of quotes from a certain person in history or a certain theme. So today I want to see how Carl Jung's inner realms, how he shared his inner realms with the world. Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung says, the capacity for directed thinking I call intellect. The capacity for passive or undirected thinking I call intellectual intuition. Carl Jung says, everything that irritates us about others can lead to an understanding of ourselves. That means, guys, if you irritate people, they understand themselves better. Carl Jung says, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. Carl Jung says, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Carl Jung says, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Carl Jung says, to ask the right question is already half the solution of a problem. Carl Jung says, thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge. Wow, this quote is... Guys, I'm going to share this quote in the chat section so people can go share it in social media. Carl Jung says a dream that is not understood remains a mere occurrence. Understood it becomes a living experience. So a dream that is not understood remains a mere occurrence. Understood it becomes a living experience. Yeah, because when it's understood, then it's no longer like a dream. It doesn't have the unknown variables change. Carl Jung says, I have always been impressed by the fact that there are a surprising number of individuals who never use their minds if they can avoid it, and an equal number who do use their minds, but in an amazingly stupid way. Carl Jung says a special ability means a heavy expenditure of energy in a particular direction, with a consequent drain from some other side of life. Oh, that's true. Anything you do, it takes something out of you. Carl Jung says we should not pretend to understand the world only by the intellect. We apprehend it just as much by feeling. Therefore, the judgment of the intellect is at best only the half of the truth, and must, if it be honest, also come to an understanding of its inadequacy. We are like small creatures asking big questions. Guys, I want to share this quote. This is an epic quote. Okay, there we go. Carl Jung says the least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. Carl Jung says if a man knows more than others, he becomes lonely. Carl Jung felt lonely, guys. But guess what? Everybody does, because that's the nature of reality. You're born alone, you die alone, and Buddha was like, if you have companions, it's a blessing. So that's why it's like in life you are something, you kind of have like that as a value, and then when greater things add to your moment, then only gratefulness is it. So I would say like the easiest solution to life's problem is to find the view where you are the most efficiently grateful for, That means you have to accept, after some point, the person like Salvador Dali would say, do not fear perfection, you'll never reach it, because you can't endlessly update, and after a certain point, you just choose to be something and you keep going. And the dimensions and the quality of the information changes. Carl Jung says nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. Carl Jung says, I shall not commit the fashionable stupidity of regarding everything I cannot explain as a fraud. Carl Jung says, to me, dreams are part of nature, which harbors no intention to deceive, but express something as best it can. That's really it. I mean, we're creatures with different abilities, Carl Jung says, I regret many follies which sprang from my obstinacy. Obstinacy. What does that even mean? Okay. Sorry guys, just a second. The quality or condition of being obstinate. Okay. I regret my follies which sprang from my obstinacy, but without that trait I would not have reached my goal. Yeah. It's as if like you need the challenge to be greater. Carl Jung says, where love rules, there's no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. The one is the shadow of the other. The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. The creative mind plays with objects it loves. Carl Jung says even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy in quotations would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. If a man knows more than others, he becomes slowly. I read that. That's a repeat. I think. Carl Jung says, as any change must begin somewhere, it is the single individual who will experience it and carry it through. The change must be indeed begin with an individual. It might be any of us. Nobody can afford to look around and to wait for somebody else to do what he is loath to do himself. That means really nobody has your eyes. So Greta, that girl who went to the UN, she should have gone and given that speech in Silicon Valley. What I mean is in person, like she should have. That's the code tunnel, guys. That's the code tunnel. Carl Jung says you are what you do, not what you say you'll do, and that's exactly right. You know, you can only talk about an advanced civilization so far. After the picture is painted, it's like an implementation is required. But the important thing is that human beings, they must, it's kind of strange because we're temporary. I feel we are constantly going through an all or nothing modality. It's like, what is it, the reptilian, um, what is it, the reptilian brain, where it's a fight or flight um, response. What is it from the, I could be wrong here. Is it the amygdala? God, I gotta brush up on my. Just a second, guys. Let me see. Yeah, I think it's the reptilian brain. Just a second. So guys, I'm going to show you an interesting picture. I mean, it's a pretty basic picture. Um, so guys, here's a picture, okay? This is a picture of the brain. It's pretty basic, plus the brain is very unknown. To even correlate meaning to every neuron is a complex act on it. It's very complex to do. How to somehow from neural activity go to psychology. It's a big leap. I mean, we see the potential for the psychology. Um, but here's the thing. The reptilian brain is where the fight or flight thing is going on. So it's like a part of the way we've evolved on this planet. You can just acknowledge it, that it's like there's no such thing as fear or courage. It's literally just this evolutionary pattern where if you feel that when something is unknown and you can't comprehend it, you want to run away from it. You know, it's like that. Scientists say it's like that. You see a creature in a bush, you know. It's like back in the day you didn't know if it was like a bird in a bush or was like some tiger gonna jump at you or something. So something people should know about the brain. I mean, it all didn't suddenly, sprout. You can see as the brain's development being based on how the human being lived. So the objective realm was also sculpting the brain that was moving the objective realm. So it's like the different, okay, the world has sculpted the ability of the human being to some degree, let's say. I'm thinking all we can, like, really, the if you look at it materialistically through a materialistic lens, the meaning of life is to just experience the evolutionary update you are. But if you were to wonder about the story, the meaning, and in what context the emotions have a value, then you have to kind of wonder about the thought of you, and to wonder if you're a thought, you shouldn't be afraid of this. This is like the one. It's like, where when else can you ask the question? When else can we wonder about the unknown other than now? So you see, it's kind of like trying to unlock your mind, and it has these different pillars that have to be in a sort of alignment. And it's like, as you live as a social creature based on abiding by it's like civilization is really stoic oriented. Like, even the leaders of nations aren't like advanced robotic calculations. They are personalities. So based on the behavior, based on how kind-hearted the person is, how much the person cares about human life, that person would be a good leader. Like, I think people underestimate how much the surrealness of the world is actually it's like it's all surreal if there's no reference to reality. Guys, there's this quote from Marilyn Monroe. It says, "It is better to be hated for what you are than to be loved for what you are not." So, guys, I'm listening to this incredible song in the back. Like, I have headphones on it. Pulled into that. Alright. Okay, let's wrap this up. So what can we say? So pretty much, guys, in this episode, I wanted to just bring in, I don't know, try to look at why violence occurs and kind of realizing it's occurring from some inner life, and this inner life is a sort of inner landscape upon the actual landscape. That means if you look at an object and you have a name for it, where is that name existing? So that name is what I consider to be the inner realms. Now the species, I feel, has generally been taught to be avoided, to avoid the inner realms, not talk about it, not care about it. We have feared the unknown. We have not dared to go beyond the caves of our wonder, for example. Some yogis have, some people have, you know. And so what does this mean? That means when we snap out of this illusion that everything in life has to be a calculated, accurate calculation, we'll realize that it's more kind of like unknown variables and known variables, and the symbiosis of how these come into place in the moment, you know. You know, it's like just like how a person, you know, they go buy a book and they just like, they can't wait to read that book and they read that book, you know. Like, just like that kind of feeling, it's kind of like sitting down and being like, all right, I'm alive once, you know, let me see who I am. You know, who says I am not allowed to know who I am? You know, that's like your birthright, believe it or not. You know, and so this wonder may take you towards an objective analysis. For example, you may conclude that beyond matter, who is there to know? So that's an incredible argument that I haven't heard from a lot of atheists, but that should be, you know. And it was something that actually, believe it or not, if I remember correctly, it was this princess who went to Rene Descartes, this philosopher, and set this idea, because Rene Descartes had this mind-body dualism, and in this mind-body dualism, this smart princess went up to him and said, uh, uh, Rene Descartes, why, if the mind is beyond the body, why does it have to do anything with the body? Why does the mind have to do anything? Why does the mind have to move the body if the mind is a higher dimensional kind of on its own? Do you know? And that kind of like pushed, like Rene Descartes was like, Jesus Christ, this princess is embarrassing me in front of my like crew, you know. But that was a very profound moment. That was an incredible moment because, you know, the soul of a philosopher transcends. It's just the conscious creature wondering about consciousness. Like that's pure, you know. That's something where your experience is like the divine part of life. It's like, am I existing right now? What is it? Now, in the inner realms, this is still part of the recap. I kind of said that, let me see, how did I share it? This cornered animal psychology that the individual feels that the expression can't exist in their own eyes. That means when the person feels they can't be themselves, they become violent. You know, and if something pushes the person, and it's kind of it's not, that's not the only reason, but I'm saying that that can be an analysis of how violence arises. And so what does that mean? That means the inner life needs to be responded to by the outer civilization. The civilization has to start caring for the inner lives of the person. And the only way we can start really caring for it without bias is to realize that the bias is coming from the thought, the self. So we have to become observers of ourselves to see beyond ourselves in a strange mystical way. So anyways, guys, somebody once said, it was like some Tibetan Buddhist teacher or something. He said, unless you conquer your anger, your enemies will be inexhaustible. The resistance you will find in life will be inexhaustible unless you conquer your anger. And the only way you can conquer your anger is to look at your past, and by accepting it, then you forgive it. And then you move on and you be something new, pretty much. That's how life works, you know? Just like how the icebergs are melting and they break off, you know, and that this lonely chunk of the iceberg fades off. That's kind of like the person's experience updating in accordance to a new vision. You are the presence of your attention. And within the presence of your attention arises as you live through the day and go through different environments. The inner environment shifts, the self shifts. You know, and when the self shifts the inner environment. Like if you notice it, it's like this. It's like you see someone in a happy mood and suddenly you say something that doesn't make them happy. You say something that makes them sad. That happy mood is like how the inner, behind the eyes, the person is a self and a world. The self of the inner realm and the self of the outer realm is simultaneous. But when we think about imagination, it's like happening in an invisible room simultaneously. So imagine like you're the center of two different colors of beams of light. Do you know? So what does that mean? That means when you see a self, the inner and the outer realm are not fragmented. They're not dual. When you just see a self. But when you see the world, when the world comes into the picture, what does that mean? That means your physical body is existing in a physical world, but the same self of your physical body, which is a subjective self, that subjective self is also living in a subjective world. Its foot is on some realm. Now the thing is, when that person is in a happy vibe, the vibe is when the inner realms have landed. You know? And guys, I'll tell you something. Before you do anything in this life, Socrates, in the view of Socrates, it's called the three sieves of Socrates. Let me see if I can find a picture. This three sieves of Socrates, like that could be like Socrates was a rapper, that would be the rap album, you know? Let me see if I can find an image here. So guys, I want everyone listening to look at the, what do you call it? Look at the wallpaper. This is something from Socrates. I want everybody to read this. This is from the three sieves of Socrates. He says, before you tell something, you have to put it through the three sieves. The sieve of truth. Did you examine what you're about to tell if it's true? That means, did you in some way in your inner realm see some sort of validity, relatability to it. You know, then the second sieve is the sieve of good. Is it good what you're about to tell? Now, let me tell you, this is in regards to human conversation, but when it comes to narrative, even Socrates wrote about the difference between the good and the chaos. Do you know? So I'm telling you, what he's saying is here is more oriented towards a social kind of direction in conversation. So he's saying, like, look at it through these filters of, is it necessary, is it good, or is it true? Now, when it comes to truth, that's a very hard thing, right? Because we all have different eyes. Yet we are physically present in the same place, but we don't have the same, like, people look at the world and it means something else. Someone raised in a Japanese culture, someone raised in Russian culture, someone raised in Italian culture, you know, it's like the way they look at the world is different. Do you know? And what does that mean? That means we're in the same world, but it doesn't communicate as the same world to each individual. So therefore, we have to study the inner realms. And I was like, the issue was, do you know how much research time has been wasted? You know that there could have been so many moments that we could have wondered about our mind. It's just that we couldn't discriminate between the inner realm and the outer realm. Society made you believe you're a single thing when that single thing can only be single if it acknowledges something else to be separate from. You see, reality is unknown, and it's an interesting time. People are, we're no longer just creatures where the environment just moves us. Now our attention is here. You know, it's like you must experience your evolution, and the greatest option, literally when you think about it, it's like, what's the best way someone can live? It is for them to live in an advanced civilization. Every person I know, you know, it's like they make sure their house is good, you know? So you it's like before you feel great, you gotta first create a great civilization to feel great in. That means you could feel great on your own in so many ways. But when the ship is sinking, that 8 billion human beings are on, then it's like a problem. Then we require strategies, and we see that people are not inspired. When you give the story that it's dangerous, it's bad, it's evil, you know, people are like, what is that? I don't want to go near that, you know? But when you explain it through geometry and mathematics, which are incredible tools that are given to us, then the fear goes away when there's a sub level before fear, where the fear is just a design. You know, it's like turning on the lights and seeing there was nothing there. So sometimes confronting the fear, if the fear is hollow, it instantly gets rid of it. You see that you had the fear. There was nothing to fear. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in so far. I'm going to open it up to Q&A for 5 minutes, and the talk has ended at this point. Thanks for listening. And I would recommend everyone to write, you know. It's like, it's a beautiful art form where your inner realms are in the most purest way allowed to be communicated. You know, it's like writing for me is like what you do after meditating. Anyways, guys, so I'll open it up to Q&A for 5 minutes, and thanks for tuning in, you know. Okay, guys. Thanks for listening. Much blessings.